Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues in the arts. Is that right? Can you hear me? Okay, good. It's a very great pleasure to be here with you, and I'm very grateful to Johan for issuing the invitation, because I have many pleasant and precious connections with Finland, which it's good to renew and enrich. When I was at the Barbican Arts Centre in London in the late 1990s, we mounted an entire festival on the arts of Finland, which the President, your President, personally opened. Then during my time at the BBC World Service, two events in particular warmed my feelings about the Finns and about the BBC Finnish service, or the Bush Finns as they always called themselves. Well, the first was that in the late 1980s, we reached an agreement with a commercial Helsinki FM radio station to rebroadcast the programmes of the BBC Finnish service. This was a landmark step in the World Service's policy of reaching listeners by going beyond our basic medium of shortwave. And that arrangement, the very first of its kind, started in Helsinki. But I also remember the Bush Finns for another reason. At the World Service, we set up a system to examine the programmes of all the 37 foreign languages, foreign, that's to say, not English, in which we broadcast. After all, we had to be sure that what we said in other languages was consistent with the core output in English. Needless to say, the Finns passed this editorial scrutiny with flying colours. But as part of the process, and to assist British awareness of the nature of other languages, we asked the heads of each of the 37 foreign services to write a note about the nature of their tongue and the problems of rendering it from English. And I think the head of the Finnish service, who was called Ese Kiviranta, rather enjoyed herself in writing her explanatory note, as she explained what a truly odd language Finnish is. It's a very down-to-earth language, she explained, with a maddening shortage of abstract nouns. There's no definite or indefinite article. Nouns have 15 declensions, of which some 13 are currently used. Verbs have 4 infinitives, some of which can be declined as nouns. By now the English were going mad. Then she launched a critique of what she and fellow Finns saw as the incredible vagueness, the lack of precision of the English language. Precision, she said, is the key word, especially in news and current affairs. You can't, in news bulletins, she said, use words such as earlier, for a short while. They're far too vague for a Finn. And then she ended up saying, cities and buildings cannot be personified in Finnish. Thus, Pentagon must be translated as Ministry of Defense of the United States, and so on and so on. Well, what emerged from all of this and other examinations by other languages threw a cold light on the very nature of English itself. It emerged, we noted, as misty as the English landscape, the expression of a people who had created a language perfectly suited to their own refusal to say what they mean. Well, I hope this introduction explains two things above all. First, why I'm very happy to be in Finland, and second, why my own interest in how we use words when speaking of the arts is so great. One further thought. The conference is devoted to the arts and autonomy in the digital era. I make no apologies for having nothing to offer directly on this question, though I think that the use of language does have a lot to do with autonomy. But even digital issues must be discussed in words and how we use them in speaking of the arts are what I want to talk about today. And let's not kid ourselves that speaking about the arts is easy. Precisely because it's complex, it requires the use of languages, words, and concepts that belong directly to the activity of the arts and not to the business and the values of business. Let's just reflect on the many ways of thinking about the arts which we largely impose upon ourselves. I think there may be at least 10 areas of tension, confusion, and contradiction that complicate our own dialogue about and sense of what we do. They may make talk about the arts difficult, but at the same time rather rich, so there is an advantage. Talk about the arts is complicated, surely, by the very notion of the word artist. That 19th century romantic image of the special individual endowed with genius, or occasionally driven by the devil. Think of the bad Lord Byron, fueled by inspiration and possessed of a unique vision and responsibility for society. Shelley, one of Britain's romantic poets, claimed that poets are the unacknowledged legislators of mankind. Well, uneasily attached to this shining exception of humanity is the implied belief that these artistic individuals are somehow so special that they are better than the rest of us. Most artists I know talk of their daily activity as sheer hard work. Romantic exceptionalism bedevils sensible talk of the arts. Artists are not better than the rest of the world, but they are probably, almost certainly, different. But sensible discussion about the arts is confused too by the insistence on analysing arts activity in almost wholly binary ways and judging them accordingly. Thus, art is deemed to be either popular or unpopular. It's judged to be either a higher form of activity or a lower one. It's either regarded as culture or as mere entertainment, as an activity for the masses or one for the elites. It's valued by some for being pure, by others for being useful. And of course, class distinctions are never far away. Art is either middle class, snobbish and bourgeois, or lower class, vulgar and proletarian. And these binary habits of thought don't stop there. Is art subsidised or unsubsidised? Financially dependent or independent? Which is better? More legitimate? More justifiable? Now, when you take these together, these conflicting ways of looking at the arts add up to a pretty confusing list of antitheses. When we think of the arts, are we looking for the artist or the worker, the genius or the practitioner? How do we label the arts? Which are better, which worse, which popular or unpopular, which higher or lower? Do we demand culture or acknowledge entertainment? Is it bourgeois or working class, useless or useful, subsidised or unsubsidised, expensive or cheap? All such questions come into play and demand answers some or all of the time when we talk of the arts. But there is no simple conversation about the arts and no simple answer. But I suggest such binary habits of discussion breed tension, antagonism, and a rancid struggle for superiority in just this one sector of human activity, the arts. If the arts world itself is riven with such conceptual division, its critics and opponents have much of their work done for them. Why do we use such words about ourselves? Let me make the case for a more unified, coherent view of the arts world rather than the fractured one I'm just trying to set out. My suggested view of a unified vision of the arts goes something like this. The arts are indeed complex, varied, and broad-based. In one image, one sense, think of them as a pyramid, a huge monolith, which does indeed have a summit and a base. But while the summit is at the top, it can only exist if the base exists first. The summit relies on the base for its existence. It is not better because it is at the top. It all forms part of the whole. Or think the arts as an organism, like a tree. We can all see the branches, the leaves, the flowers, the trunk. But without the roots, which we don't see and rarely praise, the tree dies. In the arts, we risk ignoring the far-flung, widely dispersed, deep-lying grassroots organizations because we concentrate on what we can see, on what is immediately obvious. The actual organism of the arts is interconnected, interdependent, and living in a state of mutually beneficial support, not one of conflicting tensions. Look too at the connections. I think connections are very important. The connections between the arts and the notion of creativity. Too often, they are presented and treated as opposing ways of looking at or judging the arts. Surely, the arts and creativity lie at different points on a spectrum, but they are points on the same spectrum, not on a different one. The arts and creativity are part of a single continuum. They connect with one another, they feed one another. Now, the arts don't have to prove themselves useful to be judged to be valuable. They may prove to be useful, but it's not a condition of their existence that they should be useful. And even if they do prove to be useful, this would not validate them as art. And nor does lack of evidence of usefulness disqualify them from being art. Excellence in the arts is a value in itself, quite apart from any judgment of being useful. In fact, being excellent may prove to be the finest form of being useful. After all, at a practical and professional level, many theatre or film directors who work in mass popular entertainment started life in the subsidized arts. They were trained in state conservatoires or in art colleges, state-funded institutions of one kind or another. So are most actors and designers. What unites them is not the precise spot on the spectrum of activity they inhabit, but rather the fact they're united by being in the creative, entertainment, exploitative, imaginative activity of the arts. So let's push away this instinct to the binary and don't let its false distinctions divide us. There is synergy between and among the many kinds of arts that take place. One end of the spectrum or continuum may focus more on imaginative expression and exploration. The other may concentrate more on the practical application of ideas, but these are not antagonistic activities lying poles apart, just distinct shifts of approach on a shared continuum. Now, if we can accept and adopt such a unified, inclusive view of arts activity, this, I suggest, influences the way that we speak about them. So, how should we speak about the arts? Let's start by recognizing that different groups of people use very different words to talk about them. Let's recognize that audiences speak of their experience, our experience, in one way. Academics may use very different words when talking of the very same work. Artists themselves speak in very different ways about their work, which may sometimes surprise you and us. Business and management deploy a different vocabulary and concepts to describe the same thing, and don't forget the politicians. 5 different ways of talking about the arts. What are the implications of these very different approaches? Let's take the ordinary member of the audience. ourselves a lot of the time. The average listener or viewer, take yourself in your everyday non-specialist mode. Face to face with a painting, and remember that hardly anybody spends more than 45 seconds looking at a painting. How do you begin to describe your response? I like the colours. Good start. It's very powerful. Well, that's a reaction. Doesn't quite work. That's an honest attempt to explain unease. The paint is very thick. Now we're really looking. It's very well balanced. Now we're really looking. And of course, on some days, we may choose to opine on the structure of a painting, the zeitgeist behind it, whether it's sentimental or heroic or whatever. I wonder what your own unencumbered responses to painting would be, and what you think of the language used. But if I'm anywhere near right, such direct, plain, personal language responses are very much in keeping with the art and very honest about the experience. They're not fancy, they're not pretentious, they're not overblown, and they don't force the artist or the art or the viewer into a false position or a false account of what they do. When listening to music, direct audience reaction may include, and many of you will know this very directly, it's too loud, it's too long, there are no tunes. But you also hear or say yourself, that is incredibly moving, that was sublime. What a performance from that pianist, singer, conductor, apply as necessary. Then think of the language used by academics, curators, or the writers of concert program notes. They have, it seems to me, a choice to make. Given that their knowledge and understanding is far wider and deeper than that of the amateur, we, or certainly I, would want to have access to that knowledge. I've benefited from essays in exhibition catalogues, which were wonderfully enlightening and made my understanding and enjoyment of the exhibition concerned immeasurably greater. I've read concert program notes which explain the inspiration behind, for example, Schubert's songs in astonishing detail. For such and many others, I am deeply grateful to the scholars concerned. Yet, I wonder whether they shouldn't be careful that their knowledge and the language in which it is expressed don't overburden the art itself, nor overwhelm the listener, the viewer, with complexity. In art galleries, I'm reeled away from explanatory panels by the side of a painting, which cover several inches. More time is spent reading the description of a painting than actually looking at it. I've rebelled against similar exhibition panels which instruct the viewer not just what they should think about the work in front of them, but also tell them, yes, I've had this, what they will or should feel about it. This is not scholarship, it is bullying. Nor do I believe that such heavy-handed intellectual burden imposing would or does meet with the approval or meet the needs of artists. Because in my direct experience, the language used by artists about their own work is overwhelmingly direct, simple, and unpretentious. Some years ago, I carried out an extended series of radio interviews with artists of all disciplines, ranging from composers such as George Ligeti and Elliot Carter, to sculptors such as Anthony Caro, painters like Frank Auerbach, Howard Hodgkin, the choreographer Merce Cunningham, the architects Ian Pei and Renzo Piano. None of them, over the course of some 5 years of meetings, ever used obscure or willfully complex language. I'd like to give you a few examples. Every artist I spoke to rejected or certainly avoided words like creativity or inspiration. Overheated words were what one artist called them. These were seen as being neither helpful nor as offering an accurate account of what they actually do as artists. All of them spoke of work, of hard work, often of physical labour, and of steady, continuous work as an essential part of their practice. Some of them explained in so many words that they worked in a continuum, not on a piece-by-piece basis. For just one example, the British novelist Muriel Spark, whom you may know, explained that in her prime she had at least 3 or 4 novels in her mind queuing up waiting to be written, but as she grew older this declined to just 1 or 2. For good measure, and again I think this is a very simple but unexpected description, she told me that if her plot was becoming too complicated, and they often did, her solution, her way of getting out of that complication, was to overcomplicate them until a solution emerged. Often her novels read like that, but it's a very honest way of describing what she did. Many of those I met, the artists, spoke of the need, whether in a painting, a piece of music, a book, the need to get it right, a wonderfully direct and simple sounding word. And some added that if it felt right, then it was also going to be true. And all the artists aimed at achieving their type of truth in their work. Several of them warned of the dangers of accepting easy solutions to problems that they ran into in their work. An easy answer, they insisted, could never be the right answer to a problem. Harrison Birtwistle put it like this. He said, "Very often, if I ever need a solution to something and I find it, I walk away because it was too easy." I'm sure you'll have noted the directness of these words used by artists. Right, true, easy. But how much meaning they carry, and what activity they imply. And for composers such as Harry Birtwistle or George Ligeti, the physicality of their work came in the form of an understanding of complexity. He was looking at a large 2-foot-high page of composition paper in his studio, filling up with pencil marks for new work. And Birtwistle explained that there's no equivalent in music, as for example in painting, of being able to take a big brush and make a gesture and see what the effect is. He said, you build up the sound pebble by pebble. And he pointed to the page he was working on, and he said, it takes about 10 seconds to play and 2 days to write. These creations take on an almost physical nature. And for him, he said, this seems to me to be the almost ultimate nightmare, that his often abstract dreams consisted of seeing wooden cogs that refused to fit. And amazingly, Ligeti told me that he started composing a work hundreds of times, started trying to get it to work, until he felt that there is a screw which has to be adjusted very exactly. The cogs have to mesh exactly. And if Ligeti's work was like a mathematical structure, as he said, he was quick to add, it is never a mathematical structure, in fact. And don't you think it's extraordinary that 2 great composers should evoke, in describing their work, the image of cogs in a piece of, it's not a machine, but the very image of cogs. Sometimes in the case of the bird whistle, failing to mesh, and sometimes meshing harmoniously for legacy. That will almost make them seem mechanical, except they obviously aren't mechanical. But the language. And one further image I offer you of the physical environment from which art appears, in this case poetry. For the British poet Tony Harrison, working on and in notebooks, creates the soil from which his poems emerge. And he explained it like this: I still work with pen and then I type. Then I correct it on the typescript and I stick it in to a notebook. And I stick in another one on top of that, and so on. It's a very layered thing, which comes out of often months of putting down phrases which I'm sure will lead somewhere, but I'm not sure where. I love the physicality of the process, as if Harrison is laying down a deposit of words and of phrases from which he then quarries his poem. So these are the physical elements of the artist's world, as I found them. Lots of paint, lots of words, lots of notes, lots of paper, lots of layers, all judged by whether they are right, whether they are true, whether they are too easy, whether they fit, whether they mesh. An extraordinary mixture of pebbles, cogs, layers, all finally shaped by constant, continuous, hard work. The activity is complex and mysterious. The words the artists use very plain and direct. Now life gets far more complicated. Thank you. Just water, thank you. Now, life gets more complicated, and so do the words. I've tried to suggest how audiences, academics, and above all, artists themselves respond to, assess, write about, and describe their work. I've argued that most of the language used is at best plain, direct, and above all, honest. Of course, academics deploy words and concepts of greater complexity as they might. But overwhelmingly, the dialogue about the arts within the immediate arts community, from the artist to the public, is connected to the activity. But two significant and powerful communities are not part of this consensus of discussion and communication: business and politics. Both matter to us. Both these communities are powerful. Both work together. And in recent decades, as demands for increased arts funding have grown, including from public corporations or private corporations, politicians have not unreasonably questioned the need for it and demanded that increased funding should be properly and effectively used. Arts organisations may be very artistic, say the politicians, but can they manage money at all? Increasingly, answers to that question have been offered by the world of business through the systems of management consultancy. Politicians have adopted their approach. How have the arts responded? How should they respond? You bear in mind my belief in the virtue of language that is plain, direct, relevant, and suitable to the activity it's talking about. Let me start with some examples of management consultant language that are almost universally used, or imposed, as I would argue, in assessing the efficiency and effectiveness of the arts. Since the language of management consultancy is international, I assume that all of you are equally or equivalently affected by it. Over a decade and a half, perhaps, the arts have had to come to terms with notions such as accountability and assessment. Activity or work becomes benchmarked. The arts like every other activity, are to be justified by their impact. Audiences are analysed and segmented. Arts organisations must demonstrate that they are resilient. No one talks about the future anymore. That's boring. But rather, what will be your direction of travel when you are going forward? Sounds mystical, but it's banal. I must add that in this tidal wave of new language, the arts, certainly in the United Kingdom, have been enthusiastic participants in cooking up new words. I wonder if you've experienced it here too. I invite you to think of co-opetition, a neologism to convey the idea of competition and cooperation. A pretty questionable concept in itself. Or, have you heard of edutainment, which I don't need to spell out? Or glocal, as in think global but act local, which I suppose contains a germ of a thought within it. Or what of holistic, that portmanteau wraparound idea that begs you for approval. If something is holistic, it implies, how can you possibly be against it? And in this lexicon of euphemisms, you will surely know that there are no problems or difficulties in life and work, but only challenges. There are no dilemmas, but only issues. No argument, only pushback. All redolent of a world of evasion, where verbal optimism is deemed to be an essential part of management. Most arts organisations have to convince their funders, or should I say stakeholders in business language, that if they are to deserve support, they must indicate they have a policy which encompasses a vision, which is delivered by process, leading to outcome, delivering objectives, which demonstrate impact, all of it quantified by metrics, and finally monitored by risk assessment. Pretty striking words when first heard, but do they really mean anything? I suggest that policy simply means what do you want to do? The vision is merely what's your big idea? Process means how will you do what you want to do? The outcome of your activity is just its result. The impact is merely what effect will it have? Risk assessment, a very prudent common sense activity by the way, is just a dressed up version of being aware of the dangers involved in what you do. Let me be very clear. I believe that any arts organisation worth its funding will know what it wants to do, why it wants to do it, how it intends to do it, what effect it will have, how successful it will be, and how risky it is. Why dress all this up in the grandiose language beloved of management consultants and applied to vast global corporations? Using such verbiage does not make you a better or efficient arts organisation. Come to that, no one should be profligate with or wasteful of money. But incidentally, what does an efficient arts organisation look like? Efficient at what? Nobody says. So first and foremost, it's better to use simple language than an inflated one. Then it's better to use your language than someone else's, because your activity, our activity, is different from theirs. So why be ruled by vocabulary that derives from very different activities? But principally, it's a fundamental error in my book to use the language of business to describe or to drive the activity of the arts. And let me be clear just once more, the arts are not businesses, but arts organisations which use significant sums of public or private money should be business-like. They must know how to use money and must be aware that the arts cost money. The distinction is crucial because not to make or maintain that distinction risks distorting what the arts and artists do. In the world of business management, organisations, even arts organisations, are judged to deliver product. But the program of an arts organization is not, cannot be, a product like nails or tractors. It's not a predefined, quantifiable, predictable, measurable object or quantum of activity. A drama is not a product. Neither is a painting, a novel, nor an idea. Every user knows what a product is supposed to do. It has a defined purpose. Nobody knows what a piece of art is supposed to be or to do. Therefore, to label art a product is to diminish it, possibly convenient for a management consultant, but fatal for the artist. It's the wrong language for the wrong activity. Similarly, when you go to a concert, a play, an exhibition, or read a book, what are you? Surely, the audience, the viewer, the listener, the reader. Not so fast. To the management consultant, all these important distinctions are smoothed away into just one relationship between the individual and the art. You are the customer. This is not only totally reductive, but it distorts the relationship between the person and the art. A customer requires some service in return for their payment. In the arts, the individual seeks experience. I'm not aware that when anyone looks at a painting, listens to music, or watches a drama or reads a book, that they want anything back but a great artistic experience. This is not reducible to the transactional relationship between provider and customer. Such language is more than dangerous, it is damaging. So why is this language used? Well, I suggest at least 4 reasons. First, when every activity in life and business is measured and justified by its metrics, why should the arts be spared such discipline? Second, the basic immeasurability of the worth of the arts is a standing challenge to politicians, bureaucrats, and businessmen. Third, what these often see as the vagueness and slipperiness of so much arts vocabulary invites a robust political response. And fourthly, the only way that politicians and civil servants can try to exert power and control over the arts is by tying them down with the alien but powerful vocabulary of business. More importantly, why are these alien concepts from another world so meekly accepted by so many people in the arts? After all, everyone knows that value in an artwork outside the auction room cannot be measured. Why not say so? What impact did Picasso or Stravinsky or Samuel Beckett have on life? Nothing that a consultant would accept. Though as a result of these creators' work, the world looks at objects differently, hears sounds differently, understands and uses words differently. These are considerable impacts. Why are we so weak in stating and standing up for the true, for the obvious? I wonder whether it's because we're afraid of being dismissed as indulging in special pleading to suit our cause. Well, I have nothing against that. Just because it's special pleading doesn't mean to say that it can't be accurate and true. Some of you will know that for 2 decades in the United Kingdom, mainly under the Tony Blair new Labour government, the arts were bullied by that government's demand that they were only fundable, that they only deserved funding if they were socially, economically, and politically useful. The policy that came to be known as instrumentalism. Did the arts revive cities, create jobs, educate the young? If not, why not? The mass deployment of the terms and language of business management consultancy were the weapons with which instrumentalism was to be enforced. New Labour itself preferred talk of the creative industries because it shied away from the possibility that the arts might exist for art's sake. This was dismissed as anathema. Many in the arts fell into line. Many in the arts, though, fought back, insisting that unless the arts were excellent first, they could never be useful. And over a lengthy period of years, the prime necessity of excellence in the arts came to overcome the demands of the need for utility. It is argument that was won by the correct use of words which belonged to the arts and truly reflected the nature and practice of the arts, rather than those of business or the convenient needs of politics and government. So in conclusion, I offer these thoughts. First, the arts, creativity and entertainment are not three separate worlds, but connected parts of a unified sector of human activity. What they share is far greater than what is sometimes judged to divide them. Second, that this world has never been so rich, varied, diverting, engaging, innovative, unpredictable, useful, useless, and such sheer fun as it is today. Let's celebrate it and revel in it. Third, that this world can and should only be understood, spoken about, examined, defended, and criticised in the right language and within its own terms, and not forced into conformity with the alien languages of politics, business, or management. Fourthly, that the language used about the arts by those who work in them is very often simple, honest, and unpretentious. Is something right? Is it true? Is it too easy? If it's too easy, must it be wrong? If such are the words used by the greatest artists, why should we use anything else? And finally, that the arts will only prove themselves useful, essential, if they are allowed to be excellent first. That, I suggest, is the useful paradox of our times. Thank you very much.